All right. So here's the lesson on national climate change. Yesterday we talked about global climate change. So national focuses on Canada. We're going to talk about Canadian policies on climate change, what the government is proposing, what the government is doing. We'll talk about the oil sands because that is a really big part of this conversation. There is a controversy with the Trans Mountain Pipeline, more on that later, and there's a controversy on the carbon tax. And then we'll finally cap it off by looking at some renewable resources. So on this cover slide, you can see that there is a picture of the carbon tax will cost you, that thing. If you've seen this sticker, you're probably not alone. This is everywhere right now in gas stations. So I own a car. When I go get gas, it is required by law that every single gas station put up the sticker so that anyone that's getting gas will see this sticker. This is mandated by the government of Ontario. So basically telling you that the carbon tax will cost a lot of money. And we're going to talk about the carbon tax today and basically explain what it is. So you decide whether this sticker makes sense to you. All right, so let's look at the wall of shame. This is the top 10 countries in the world right now in terms of carbon emissions. All right, number one is China by far, double that of number two, the US. And the US is double that of the number three, India. And you see how this works? So it is top heavy, and when you go down, it drastically declines. But Canada is ranked number 10. Is that bad? Well, hell yes. Look at the column under 2017. That is the most recent statistic. So we are number 10 in 2017. Canada has a really small population. Okay, it is about 37 million people. And yet we are ranked top 10 in the world. And this is not per person, this is as a country. So with such a tiny population, that is literally 2 cities in China, 37 million. And yet we are number 10. So that figure is absolutely pathetic, okay? Canadians have a lot to be ashamed of when it comes to carbon emissions. We live luxurious lifestyles that most of the world do not have access to. We take a lot of it for granted as well. We have clean drinking water from the toilet. We wash our cars with drinking water. We have the heaters on all the time. We have electricity on all the time. We can get these things basically anytime we want, as opposed to other nations where these are luxury. In India, a lot of people don't have electricity. They don't have access to clean water. They get clean water 1 hour per day. So very different worlds. So Canada has it really good in terms of life standards. So take a look at this map of Canada. This is a poll. This is asking the question to Canadians that answered the poll. Well, it's not really a question. It's more like a statement, whether you agree with that statement. Earth is getting warmer. That's the statement. So do you agree with this or not? And the legend is to the right. The darker the green, the higher the percent of people that agree with this statement. If you're purple, then you disagree. So the lighter the green, the lesser people agrees. Thankfully, it is all green. Okay, the Northwest Territories, the Yukon and Nunavut, there's no data. Labrador has no data. Wait, no, that's Newfoundland. Yeah, that also has no data. But for the provinces that do have data, it's all green. But I know you notice it too. There is a patch of white, okay, and that is around the 50% mark. And you can see those two provinces, Alberta and Saskatchewan, and southern Manitoba as well. And those provinces, a vast amount of people disagree with the statement that the earth is getting warmer, so aka climate deniers. And it is not an accident that this map is like this. Those two provinces, they have vested interests in fossil fuels. All right, so before we address Alberta, let's just take a look at what the governments are promising and what they're doing. So I don't know if you followed the previous election in October, because I did, because I had to vote. So I summarized their climate plan. Like, I didn't care about the other policies. I cared specifically about your climate plan. Well, and education plan, but mostly climate. So I summarized them in a somewhat funny statement. If politicians were honest, this is what they're really saying. If you read between the lines, if you do the research and you don't take the word at face value, if you really kind of dig into their claims, this is essentially what they're saying. So starting with the left, the Conservatives, I don't have a serious climate plan, but my voters won't care. Well, he didn't say that, obviously. This is not his quote, but basically that's what his action is speaking. He has a kind of pathetic climate plan that no serious expert think it will work. Only conservatives boast that it will work, but the polls taken by conservative voters, the majority of the people that vote conservative, they don't care about climate change at all. So it doesn't make sense for this guy, Andrew Scheer, to come up with a really good climate plan that will actually piss off his voters. But he can't not have one. If he just come out and say, I don't believe in climate change, that's self-destructing politically. So he can't actually come out and say, well, I think he definitely does believe in climate change. He just doesn't believe in action for climate change. But he still says that he cares, like all of these politicians. Now, the politically correct thing is to say that you care about climate change. The only candidate that says climate change is not real in Canada is Maxime Bernier. He lost his only seat. He's the leader of the People's Party. No, I don't believe that's a real party. Yeah, that's more like
the People's Party is a real party, but just nobody votes for them, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, I call it the Nazi Party of Canada. Extremely right-wing, extremely racist. He wants to end all immigration, and he doesn't believe in climate action. So he was so right-wing that the Conservatives were like, you know what, you're an idiot. So yeah, he's not here. He's not important. So anyway, yeah, the Conservatives, they do care about climate change, okay? They have to. It's just that their plans don't really reflect that because they want the votes of mostly Alberta and Saskatchewan, and those provinces are really pro-oil, so Conservatives have to really be careful about what they say. Okay, so Trudeau is the current Prime Minister. This guy is all talk. Like, I showed you a video of Trudeau yesterday, where he signed the Paris Agreement, and he made this really touching speech at the United Nations. Well, not in Paris, not the United Nations, to the world. It sounded really good, and during his campaign, he's been saying all the right things about climate change. He's stressing that this is a national emergency. We need to act now. I vote Liberals, not Conservative, because we have a real plan. So, but really, is he doing it though? No. Okay, to summarize his position, I do have a climate plan, but it is insufficient. But I sure will sell it as if it is, let's build a pipeline. So he's all talk. He's like, yeah, this is a big problem. Here's my plan. Well, what is his plan? Well, on top in that text, he promises to meet our Paris 2030 targets, which we are on track to miss, by the way, but he claims that we are on track to hit. So what is that target? Well, we will reduce our CO2 emissions by 30% compared to 2005. Where did he come up with that figure? Oh, that was set by Stephen Harper, the previous Conservative Prime Minister. So he isn't really changing what the previous government is doing. He's still following old goals. And he also claims to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. That means by 2050, Canada will have a net zero emission of carbon dioxide. This doesn't mean we literally won't emit carbon dioxide. It just means that we'll be planting trees or do some other stuff to offset that carbon so that, we release it and then we do something else that will reduce carbon so the net gain of carbon from Canada is zero. Yeah, and then he approves the Trans Mountain Pipeline, which a lot of people, most leaders except two, is against. So we'll talk more about what the Trans Mountain Pipeline is and why that's a controversy. But yeah, his actions, they don't really reflect his words, okay? He's all talk. Next, NDP, if you read their climate platform, it actually sounds pretty good, except NDP has been invisible ever since they were founded. They have never won the election ever. The closest time they got was they won the leader of opposition, the Liberals self-destructed that election. So yeah, he's never going to get elected. So I actually have an ambitious climate plan, but I'll never win the election. So NDP is leaning more towards the left. A lot of things they say, well, a lot of Canadians don't like, especially if they're well off. So yeah, it's just that Canadians never trust the NDP. It's always liberal and conservative. Liberals and NDP are too close to each other in terms of their policy, so people just vote liberal. Okay, the last one is an actual effective climate plan. Well, that is from the Green Party, so obviously that's the only thing they care about. So Elizabeth May actually has a good plan. By good, I mean it will work. It will reduce Canadian carbon emissions. And if we all listen to her plan, we will be on track to meet our targets. Problem is, it takes tremendous amount of effort and sacrifice to achieve that plan. It is not realistically achievable. Like, there's no way that's going to be implemented, and she's not going to win. Nobody votes green. Well, not nobody. It's just like 1% of the people vote green. So yeah, basically you vote green, unless you're in BC, that vote is probably going to be wasted. And Elizabeth May is too concerned about the environment. She does not really concern herself with the economy at all. So that's a huge sacrifice economically, which makes her plan kind of untenable. That's why she's not getting a lot of votes. So all of these politicians have problems, okay? When you go vote, you just have to keep in mind that you have to choose between basically a bunch of liars and idiots. Okay? Who is the least stupid of them all? That's how I look at politics. I don't really support any party. It's just how much do I hate that party and how much do I not hate that party. And when it comes to climate policy, some of these are obviously better than others. Just know that they all have their flaws, and I don't trust any of them. So currently it is the Liberals, and the Liberals are really not doing that much for the climate, to be honest. Before we can address this further, we got to look at the problem in Alberta. So there is a vast reserve of oil in Alberta. Okay, Canada is a huge producer of oil. Canada produces about 10% of the world's oil. Okay, so this is something that Albertans are extremely proud of. This is their moneymaker. This builds the backbone of their economy. Okay, and this also supports the Canadian economy. So this is extremely valuable for Canada as well. Well then, so what's the problem? The oil sands go by another name, the tar sands. It depends on who you ask. Some people call it the oil sands. Some people call it the tar sands. That reflects their opinion on what they view the oil sands to be. So this has a negative connotation because of its negative impact on the environment. So to extract fossil fuel, you will destroy the environment. You have to destroy ecosystem just to extract the fossil fuel. And when you burn it, you basically cause climate change. But a lot of people in Alberta are proud of their energy sector, and they are against any government restrictions on basically the development of fossil fuels, which is understandable because that's their lifeline, that's where their income comes from. So hence you have this conflict between the federal government, which is trying to reduce carbon emissions, and Alberta and Saskatchewan. There's also oil sands in Saskatchewan, it's just not nearly as large. So there is now increasing pressure to restrict the oil sands, and it is hurting Alberta's economy. So hence the Premier, Jason Kenney, has a huge problem with that. So This is reflected in the elections. Here is the election result in 2019. In blue are the voters that voted Conservative, which is the biggest opposition to the Liberals. They are pro-oil, and Liberals won. Notice that they have exactly 0 seats in Alberta and Saskatchewan. All right, so basically 2 entire provinces does not support the current government. So this is probably the biggest divide in Canadian history. I'm even including the referendum for Quebec. There is now talk of separatism in Western Canada. It is not from the government, it is from certain people, and they call it Wexit, okay, after Brexit. They're like, if Canada will not look after Alberta, why should we become part of Canada? We will be better off ourselves. So, well, the Premier doesn't really entertain, he doesn't entertain the thought of separatism, but the voice is out there, okay? So there is a huge divide. Furthermore, Trudeau, he basically pissed off everybody. He obviously will piss off the conservatives despite what he does. That's the opposition. But he also pissed off his, so to speak, allies. He has a minority right now. He needs allies. So, yeah, this is one of the few instances where the Liberals and the Conservatives actually worked together. They both support the Trans Mountain Pipeline. So they plan on building a pipeline that will connect Alberta to the west coast of British Columbia. Trans Mountain because it has to cross the mountains, the Western Cordillera, the Rockies. The reason for that is they want oil to be, easily transported to British Columbia. Cheaper oil means you can afford it and you can have better sales. Alberta is currently suffering from low oil sales and cheap prices. So if you build the pipeline, it will boost Alberta's economy. Many people oppose this, especially on the left, NDP and the Greens. There's no way they can support this, because how can you support a pipeline designed to more effectively disperse fossil fuels when we are trying to reduce our fossil fuel consumption? So they're like, this has to be completely against any climate action that we must take. There's no way. We're stepping backwards here. The Liberal government is in support of this. So they're less extreme when it comes to climate action. They do want to do something about the carbon emission, but they don't want to piss off the voters in Western Canada. And also, Trudeau has to care about the economy. Otherwise, he's not doing his job as prime minister. So he did approve the pipeline. Before the coronavirus, if you read the news, it's dominated by pipeline debates. I'm sure you've heard that many Indigenous people blocked railroads. They went onto the street to protest because allegedly the pipeline is going through their land without permission. So a chief of a reserve is deciding to protest. And this protest goes from BC to Quebec. Okay, even in Ontario, there are some sites where there are protests. That was the headline. And the Liberal government is trying to de-escalate, but they don't want to use the police force. So there's a huge conflict. And then the coronavirus hit. Ain't nobody coming out anymore. It would be stupid to go and, strike during the coronavirus pandemic. You want to stay home. So that kind of solves that problem for now. So right now we have a bigger problem. But, once this virus blows over, we'll have to go back to the Trans Mountain Pipeline debate. So half the government supports it. The other half, well, I shouldn't use half because they don't have equal seats. Most of the government supports it. If the Liberals and Conservatives support it, it's going to be passed. But the NDP and the Green, yeah, they're really pissed about that. Okay, so what can we do as a government, as a country, to limit carbon emissions? Okay, so there are 2 major strategies and some minor ones. We'll talk about the 2 major strategies first. The first one is cap and trade. Now, this is not currently implemented federally across the board. It was proposed before. So how this works is governments will issue a permit to companies to emit carbon dioxide. And that sounds insane. You're trying to limit carbon dioxide and you're issuing permits. Well, you can only emit carbon dioxide if you have a permit. And you have a cap. You have a limit of how much carbon dioxide your company is allowed to emit. Okay? If you hit that cap, you cannot emit anymore. If you want to emit more, you can buy the permit of other companies. So let's say if you look at the picture, there are two factories, the red one and the green one. The green one is completely at its capacity. It is not allowed to emit more carbon dioxide, so it must shut down its carbon activity. The red factory didn't use all of the cap, so they can sell that unused allowance to the green factory, and in exchange they get money back. Okay, so you can trade these permits like, you know, a commodity. In that way, you have an incentive to release less CO2 to make money off of the permit. And the factories that must release CO2, well, you're gonna have to pay a price. You're gonna have to buy a permit. So there's cost to emitting more, and there is benefits to emitting less. And the free market will gradually reduce carbon emissions because people are incentivized to do so. Okay.
So, Mr. Joe, I have a question. Would this be an example of a negative feedback loop, because eventually they would just start using less and less carbon?
Well, I never thought of it that way, but it's more like a positive feedback loop.
Oh yeah, because it's more action. Yeah.
Yeah, so the action results in further action. You know what I mean? If you
Yes.
And the cap will be lowered gradually. Okay, every year or every few years, the permit allows you to release less and less and less. So basically, they get weaned off of carbon. You don't stop cold turkey. If you try to quit any addiction, you can't stop cold turkey. That's very difficult to do. So people typically, you know, wean it off. So that's cap and trade. Okay, the idea is make it a market incentive. Okay, then people will naturally do it. A lot of people like this idea. Here's the other system, the carbon tax system. Currently, Canada has a carbon tax. So the Liberal government decided to use carbon tax and not the cap and trade. So what is the carbon tax? There is a huge debate on carbon tax. This went to the Supreme Court of Canada. Many premiers sued Trudeau and his government and saying that this is unconstitutional. I've had friends, like close friends, argue with me about the carbon tax. So yeah, this is like a friendship ender. So what is the carbon tax? In a carbon tax, the government levies a tax, okay, on any activity that will emit carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. If you engage in anything at all, like driving, heating your home, if you go to the grocery store and you pick up grocery, that emits carbon dioxide, not because you drove there, because to get the grocery into the store, you need to get it there via travel, which burns fossil fuels. So if you want to buy something from Korea, import it from Korea. If you want to buy fruits from Brazil, well, that has a tax. So under this policy, the price of anything that depends on carbon fuels will go up, okay? And if the price goes up, demand will go down. So people will typically try to buy less of that product, okay, out of the adjust in the price. Okay, so you have an incentive to not buy carbon heavy things. If you spend money on alternatives that don't produce carbon or produce less carbon, you save money. So this is another economic incentive for people to steer away from carbon heavy activities. So without the carbon tax, these alternatives usually would be more expensive. Okay. Now with the carbon tax, because if you want to buy something carbon heavy, you have to pay an extra tax. Now suddenly that alternative is starting to look better. So for example, let's say you're trying to buy this product, right? Let's say you're trying to buy tomatoes, for example. There are Canadian homegrown tomatoes, and then there's Brazilian tomatoes. And for some reason, Brazilian tomatoes are cheaper because of trade. It's easier for Brazil to grow tomatoes than Canada, so they have a crap ton of tomatoes, so they want to sell it to Canada very cheaply. Sure. So people want to buy the Brazilian tomatoes because they're cheaper. Why not, right? But if you impose a carbon tax to get tomatoes from Brazil to Canada, you gotta, fly it there. You can't actually, use any other means because tomatoes will rot. If you fly it there, you release carbon dioxide. So with the tax, let's say the tomatoes are now more expensive. So people will start to buy the Canadian tomatoes. You see how this works? That is just one example of how this works. So what happened once the government implemented this? Well, in 2019, the federal government implemented on every single province, okay? The idea is if you don't already have a carbon tax, the federal government will give you one. And this is $50 per ton of CO2 emitted. Now, this didn't come across very well. The conservative politicians across the board were against this. The four prominent figures, that really outspoken figures, Andrew Scheer, the leader of opposition, obviously he's going to be against this. He said in October that if he becomes prime minister, this is quoting him, by the way, the first thing he will do is scrap the carbon tax. Okay. Scott Moe of Saskatchewan, Jason Kenney of Alberta, and Doug Ford of Ontario, all of these premiers, they went to court with Trudeau, fighting the carbon tax, saying that it is unconstitutional. The Constitution does not allow the government to implement a tax on a province, and then they lost. The Supreme Court ruled that this is a problem. This is not a province problem. This is a nation problem because carbon emissions affect the entirety of Canada. Okay, so they challenged it, spent millions of dollars, and they are still currently trying to challenge this. Now, why is this so unpopular? The conservatives call it a liberal tax grab. Okay, you're just trying to tax people for more for money. And Andrew Scheer called it a tax on everything. He's probably right. Like, it is a tax on everything. Everything costs carbon. So yeah, liberals are putting a tax on literally anything you do. If you want to go to work, the gas prices will increase because there's a tax. You want to buy food, there's a tax because you have to import the food. You want to heat your homes, you're burning natural gas. There's a tax. So the slogans by the conservatives that are against the carbon tax are like, the liberals are trying to punish you for heating your home. They're trying to punish you for driving to work. They're trying to punish you for going to the grocery store. That's not a good climate plan. That does nothing. So why do the liberals support this? Well, the idea is actually quite simple. It's basic economics. If you increase the price of goods, you will decrease its consumption. Look at the infographics. This is a real example with cigarette sales. When price in blue goes up, sales go down, okay? This is basic 101 economics. You might not decide to consume less of it, but there will be people that will consume less of it. For example, if you drive to school, if you drive to work, and if gas prices increase, you might be saying, well, I have to drive to work anyway, so I have to just pay the tax. This isn't doing anything. All the tax is doing is taking money from my pockets. Well, not everyone thinks that way. You can't think as an individual. You have to look at the economy as a whole. Okay, so that's the mistake a lot of people make. They argue that, well, that's not going to change my lifestyle. I have to heat my homes. So I'm just paying more money now, so they hate the carbon tax. which is understandable. But if you look at the economy as a whole, this does reduce carbon consumption. Another example is speed limit. I don't know if you noticed. Well, I guess you're not in Scarborough, but I live in Scarborough. Recently, I've been noticing that the speed limit on most streets have been reduced to 50. It was 60 before. I hated that. I don't like driving at 50. That is way too slow. But why do they do it? Because statistics show on a road that has a limit of 60, there's a higher death rate for a car accident. And at 50, you have simply a lower death rate. So they argued we should reduce the speed limit to save more lives, which does save more lives. It's just I don't like the fact that I have to drive at 50. I could make the argument and say, well, I'm a very careful driver. If I drive at 60, I'm not going to have an accident. So you're just slowing me down. But then I realized that this is not about me and what I would do. This is for the whole city of Scarborough. So statistically, this does reduce the amount of death through car accidents, whether I like it or not. So this is the idea behind a carbon tax. People are incentivized to buy products that are less carbon heavy. And if something is a must, you have to do this. Like you have to heat your homes, for example. Well, that's just too bad. You can heat your home to a lower temperature. Instead of 25, you can set it to 20. I stopped driving to Hudson. Okay, I used to drive in September and October, and then after that, I stopped driving. I take the bus now. One reason is, well, it's just too slow to drive. The bus offers the same amount of travel time. And second, I save a ton on gas. Okay, and I protect the environment. I reduce my carbon footprint. So that's my incentive for busing instead of driving, despite the fact that I own a car. All right, so that's the idea behind the carbon tax. One major misconception, something that the opposition does not wish to talk about, is that this is not a tax grab. This is a zero revenue tax, okay? Meaning that whatever tax you pay via the carbon tax, the government will redistribute that and give it back to you with your income tax return. So you'll get it back. It's just that whether you get back more or less, it depends on how much tax you paid. You're going to get back a set amount, and that number will not change for that year. So for example, in 2019 in Ontario, if you look at that graph, everyone that lives in Ontario that filed for taxes will get back $244. I didn't file my 2019 taxes yet, but I know my mom did, and I saw on her tax receipt, climate action rebate, $244. She got that money from the government for free. Why? Because it is a zero revenue tax, okay? She obviously spent money buying stuff, so she did contribute to climate change, and she paid some of the carbon tax. The government just gave her back $244. Does that cover her expense of paying the carbon tax? Well, that depends on how much she paid. If you engage in low carbon activities, you're going to pay a smaller number than that, 244. So you'll actually make money. But if you decide to live a lavish lifestyle with a carbon heavy spending, you're going to be paying more tax than you get back. So you are punished for your decisions. You see how this works? So this is an incentive to guide Canadians to make better decisions with regards to carbon emissions. According to the Liberal government, if you want to believe them, go ahead. I personally don't believe in any politician until I actually see the data for myself. But according to the Liberal government, they argue that 80% of people in Ontario will get back more money than they spend. So this is definitely not a tax grab. The government are actually, in a way, giving you money. And for other provinces like Alberta and Saskatchewan, they get more back than Ontario because they're more dependent on fossil fuels. So you might say, you'd be thinking, oh, well, this is not fair. I got back $244. But if you live in Saskatchewan, you got back $403. Why? Because Saskatchewan is a fossil fuel province. So the people there are more dependent on this than you are. So that's why it is not equal across the provinces. So the oil provinces are most compensated by the carbon tax. All right, so this is just to clarify that this is zero revenue. A lot of people don't actually know that. When I engage in an argument with friends about the carbon tax, I am in support of the carbon tax. I'm in support of anything that reduces carbon. He is not. Okay, we had this heated debate. He's like, this is a tax grab. And I was like, no, this is zero revenue. He's like, oh, did not know that. So yeah, a lot of people don't know this. The Conservative Party, I'm not trying to target them. I'm not trying to support the Liberals. I will be hating the Liberals too. It's just that the Conservatives are spreading false information. Well, they're not spreading false information. They're spreading incomplete information. You're not looking at the whole picture. They're only saying that you have to pay more tax, which is true, but they're omitting the part that you'll be getting that money back. Okay, so if you look at the carbon tax sticker on the first page, you can see this at every gas station. It only shows you the cost of the carbon tax. Yes, this sticker is factually correct. The government didn't lie, but it is incomplete. It is not telling you that you'll be getting more money back. And it is not accounting for the cost of not having a carbon tax. If you emit more carbon, which causes climate change, the effect of climate change will cause more money to be lost in the economy. Billions of dollars will have to be spent on programs to mitigate the effect of climate change. So that's a net loss if we don't do this. All right, so Trudeau claims that most Canadians will get more money back so that they wouldn't oppose the carbon tax. Okay, so that's basically what it is. I hope now you have a better understanding of what the government policy is, and then you decide whether you want to support this incentive or not, okay? Another thing that is also quite popular nowadays is carbon offset. Okay, what is a carbon offset? Well, that is like a credit that somebody can buy to compensate for emitting carbon dioxide. Okay, let's say you took a flight to somewhere. Okay, let's say you want to attend a climate rally in Vancouver. So you take a flight to Vancouver, which is ironic because your climate rally is aimed at reducing carbon, but you just flew there on a plane, so you emitted carbon dioxide, no problem. I will spend money and buy this credit. So basically, I'm donating money to this organization that plant trees, for example. By planting trees, you will suck carbon back because trees are carbon sinks. So I spent money to plant trees to compensate for the fact that I just emitted carbon. So you're still technically carbon neutral. You see how this works? So that's carbon offset. And one of the interesting developments during the election was, you know how the politicians, they have to fly to different cities to basically beg you to vote for them? Every party has their own party plane, except the Liberal Party. The Liberals have two party planes. One of them carries their cargo, one plane carries the passengers. So Andrew Scheer is like, well, for a person that talks about climate change a lot, why do you have two planes while everyone has one? You are such a hypocrite. To that Trudeau rebuttal, well, I purchased carbon offsets. Andrew Scheer didn't even buy carbon offsets. That's his argument, all right? Because I spent money to buy basically a permit, I invested money into green technology, so this justifies me having two planes. Now, do you really buy into that argument? Well, obviously, Scheer doesn't. Should you? Well, the problem with carbon offset is it doesn't actually help with climate change. You still emitted that carbon into the air. It doesn't matter how much money you spent on growing trees. The trees don't grow overnight. Okay, trees take years to develop, and their effects are slow and gradual. It's going to take a long time for those trees that you planted to get rid of the carbon dioxide you emitted. It's way faster to emit than absorb it, okay? So this carbon credit, it doesn't really decrease the amount of carbon in the atmosphere right now, which is what we want to do, all right? So you still emit it. All the carbon credit does, some people argue, is that it gives a person a clear conscience while doing so. Right? So you don't have to feel guilty about taking a flight because you purchased carbon offset, but you still emitted carbon dioxide. That's not going to change. So the argument of carbon offset is not a good one. These activities, they don't take effect immediately, so you are still contributing to the problem. All right, so this is what I mean by Trudeau. Does he really mean what he says? If it's really, an advocate for climate change and the environment, why would he have two planes? Every other party has one. Okay, Elizabeth May traveled throughout Canada with a Tesla. So she actually has zero carbon emission during her travels. So that is zero carbon emission. But still, even if you have a Tesla, an electric car, it depends on where you plug it in. If you plug it in using a source that generates electricity through fossil fuel, let's say a coal plant, well, you're still emitting carbon dioxide. If you plug in your Tesla with the power plant that uses hydro, then yes, you have zero emissions. Okay, still, electric cars depends on how you charge it. So here is a video during a live debate before the election. And this, I actually watched the debate. This part, I thought to be a really good session. Elizabeth May made some really good arguments against Trudeau.
To avoid catastrophic levels of global warming, we must double our current target. We must listen to science. We must not build the Trans Mountain Pipeline. It's not the last because it gets canceled if we're serious. You can't negotiate with physics. You can't as Prime Minister, you can't as leader of the Liberal Party. There's a carbon budget. It doesn't budge. And that's why it's so heartbreaking for me to look at you today and know you could have done so much more the last 4 years. Please God, you don't get a majority this time around because you won't keep your promises.
From the Rockies to the Bay of Fundy, Conservative premiers have gotten elected on promises to do nothing on climate change, and we need a strong federal government to fight them, to make sure that we are moving forward on protecting the future generations from the impacts of climate change.
But your goal is a target for failure. When you hang on to Harper's target of 30% by 2030, you are predestining us. Well, you better get to double that target, or you never get to carbon neutrality by 2020.
Time is up, Ms. May. Time is up, Ms. May.
Wow, see, that was a really heated part. Notice that Trudeau dodged the question. May is telling him that you're not doing enough. His response is, well, the Conservatives are doing nothing. So he didn't actually say he didn't do enough, but he's implying that, well, okay, if I'm not doing enough, it's still better than the Conservatives, so you should still vote for me. So that's his reply, if you read between the lines. But Elizabeth May, her targets saying that you should double the current target, that is extremely difficult to achieve, and she knows it, but she believes that this is a climate emergency. We should be acting like how we treated the coronavirus pandemic, sacrifice everything just to keep the virus at bay. So we should sacrifice similarly for climate change just to save the future of the planet. So now I want to hear your opinions. Do you think the current Liberal government, led by Trudeau, is doing a satisfactory job? So I actually want you to answer this question. Yes or no, and tell me why. Anyone?
To be honest, no, because he does say he does a lot of things, like you pointed out before, but to be honest, his actions don't really show it. I mean, 2 planes, is that really necessary? And the carbon sinks, as you mentioned, it's slow, and he can probably emit like 10 times more worth of carbon than his carbon sinks would ever take back in the short term. And at the same time, like the pipelines, not only does that kind of interfere with Indigenous matters, but it also just essentially, like, he's supporting the oil sands through that. But yeah,
but don't we have to support the oil sands? That's part of the Canadian economy. You can't just abandon a province like that.
No, I don't think that they should abandon the oil sands, but wean them off the oil sands slowly and then move towards more sustainable and greener, like energy sources.
Okay, no, I see what you're saying. Yeah. Any other responses?
I think we should just copy Germany because they're doing a really good job.
What is Germany doing currently?
There are a lot of cities in Germany that are 100% reliable on just renewable energy sources like wind and solar.
Really? Okay, that's impressive because wind and solar is one of the worst sources for generating electricity. That's it, just wind and solar?
Well, you can use hydro, but hydro is also damaging to the environment.
Well, fair. Canada does have the advantage of having a lot of rivers, so we do generate most electricity from hydro. It's actually not fossil fuels. But yeah, like you're right, we should transition more into renewables. Problem is, renewables are not reliable. Like if you're in the hospital and you're on a life machine, do you really want that to be hooked to a windmill? You see what I'm saying? Like if the wind stops blowing, you're dead. Fossil fuels, despite its environmental damages, it is extremely reliable. You're not going to get a power outage.
Well, that's why you would store it, right?
Say what?
Store the energy from the
Well,
solar.
yeah, you could, but like there will be days where there is no wind and there will be days where it's windy. It's not reliable. Same with solar cells. It is horribly inefficient. You don't capture the vast majority of the sunlight. You get a tiny fraction of that, and only when it is sunny. Yes, you can store that, but that is not nearly enough. So I don't know what else Germany is doing, possibly nuclear power plants. But yeah, like we do need to transition to renewables. That is not a question that needs to debate. Okay.
But I mean, to be honest, if you use the argument that it's not sustainable, renewables aren't sustainable, and to an extent you are right, but then at the same time, how long are we gonna have these fossils? Like we're burning them at even like an exponential rate every single year. Like how long are the fossils gonna last?
Well, exactly.
So,
I believe I heard a statistic that we have enough fossil fuels to burn for the next 50 years, and then it will get too expensive to extract more. But like we're not even going to get there. The Paris Agreement, whether you want to believe what they're saying or not, a lot of countries are saying carbon neutrality by 2050. That's what Canada is saying. So that means by 2050, we'll drastically reduce our carbon emissions. In fact, we won't have a lot of it so that we can easily just plant some trees to offset it. Okay, so we are trying to lower carbon emission. We have a target for 2030, 30% below 2005. Many people say that's not enough, but that's a target nevertheless. So we are trying to reduce our dependence on fossil fuels and as a substitute, develop alternative sources. Okay, so a lot of money should be, well, that's what Trudeau said. He's going to pour a lot of money into green energy research so that these technology will become available and more reliable in the not too distant future. But in the meantime,
sorry, didn't you say that there is virtually like a 0% chance that we are going to reach our
goal?
30%?
Yeah, pretty much.
So, I mean, what's the point in investing our future in that if we can't reach it?
Well, see, that the government is never going to tell you that we can't reach it. I didn't hear from the Liberals, let's say, like we can't reach that 2030 target. I heard it from an independent source at the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. They say that we can't reach it, so I'm going to trust them. So yeah, like we can't reach that target with what we're doing now. Doesn't mean we won't reach it by 2030. It's just that if the Trudeau government just stays on course and changes nothing, he does what he's doing now, we're not reaching it. Despite that he's saying that we will, we're probably not. And many people, here's the scary part, many people are saying that we should do more on climate change, and secretly hoping that we will fail. You see, they want to say the right things, but at the same time, they're wishing that the Trudeau government doesn't actually reach that target, because that means we have to sacrifice a lot. We have to pay a carbon tax. We have to consume less carbon. We have to drive less. We have to heat our homes less. So we don't like that. You see what I mean? So many people are saying that they're saying the right thing. That they watch these videos. They listen to the climate change experts. They listen to Greta Thunberg and like, oh my goodness, we should do something about climate change. And then they go for a drive. You see what I mean? So yeah, a lot of people are just talk. Very few Canadians are actually willing to pay out of their pockets in order to see this happen. Okay, any other responses? So how can the government do better?
Possibly because we are currently being run by, well, not really, but like possibly because the Liberal government, in my opinion, should just stick to their word. And if Trudeau is serious about researching more reliable energy resources, then we should get to that very quickly so that we can start moving towards renewable energy resources. We could diversify the economy in Alberta and Saskatchewan, and then we can wean them off, sort of.
Well, he is actually trying. It's easier said than done. You see what I mean? You can say that you're going to transition the economy. That's not something you do quickly. You can't do that overnight. You have to take years, and people will lose their jobs. If you end subsidies on fossil fuel, that means the government stops supporting them. A lot of workers will be out of a job. That they mine coal and oil for a living. So we have to find programs for those people. And Trudeau is saying that we'll find a transition program for those people. He's not going, well, at least he says he's not going to leave those people behind. He'll transition Alberta and Saskatchewan to a more green energy source and economy. But, right now, we can't do that. We don't have the infrastructure. We don't have the technology. So that's why he's building the Trans Mountain Pipeline to help Alberta and its economy. Yes, that is dispersing fossil fuels, but people need to live. People will starve. They won't have money. You see what I'm saying? Yeah, it's not clear cut.
Like, what if there were re-education programs so that they could essentially bring people who devoted their livelihood to mining oil sands? What if you could re-educate? What if there were like programs that provide free education at?
Yeah, I've heard that one. But think about it this way: you're a miner, okay? You work at the oil sands, and you're like what, 40, 50 years old. What, you want me to go back to school to learn something that I was never good at? You want me to change my profession at this stage of my life? You see what I mean? Many people choose certain fields because they want to do it. They like doing that, and they do it well. They're capable of doing that. If you force them into another field, you re-educate them. That's going to be difficult. If you force me to learn computers, like let's say we don't need teachers anymore. Teaching is automated online, so teachers are fired. Okay, re-educate me to become something else. Well, I can't become a computer expert overnight. I tried to take computer science. I suck at it. I can't even program something just very simple. So it's easier said than done. You have to take into account people's abilities and also whether they have time, whether they want to do it. So it's not a matter of just educating the population. People should be able to choose what they want to do. Yelling, if you don't have a good solution, that's fine, because nobody does. If you have a good solution, like, the government would like to know. You see what I mean? Because they don't have a good solution. Any other inputs on this? Come on, people, you live in a country where you can criticize the government. That can't be said for many countries. No, we're good? Okay, so well, I hope this gives you a better idea of what your government, the different parties are trying to propose, and whether they are doing a sufficient job at the climate change. So let's look at this infographic. This is the Canadian energy generation chart. 60% of our electricity, okay, the energy are generated by hydro. That is a good thing for climate change, despite, hydro does damage the ecosystem. It has its negative effects on the environment, but at least it's not releasing as much carbon dioxide. Nuclear also not releasing a lot of carbon dioxide, very, very negligible amounts. So those are, so to speak, green energy sources. And then you have coal, oil, and others, okay? So we need to cut those. And there are plans to have more electric vehicles by 2030. I think some party, I forget whether it was the Liberals, they proposed that by 2030, we will end all sales of oil, gasoline vehicles. We will only sell electric vehicles. You see what I mean? But yeah, again, probably not going to happen. Like, we're too dependent on gasoline vehicles. I always wanted an electric vehicle. I almost got one. I did some research and I realized I can't charge it. I have nowhere to charge it at home. So even if the government wants to transition to electric vehicles, you have to build a lot more charging stations, because gas stations are everywhere. They're easily accessible. They're easy to fill up on your tank. It takes like 1 minute at a gas station to fully charge a Tesla. Depends on your source. The fastest source is 30 minutes. And those are only a couple places in the city. If you want to charge it at home, that takes like 20 hours. So yeah, we have many problems transitioning into a more...
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
If you go back, well, you don't need to, but it says, so nuclear is supposed, like, how clean and efficient is nuclear energy?
Okay, good question. If you mean clean as in no greenhouse gas emission, it is very clean. It does not emit greenhouse gas. It emits like less than 1%, and that is not because of the nuclear process. It's probably because of some side reaction. How efficient is it? It is, I forget the exact number, around a few hundred times more efficient than fossil fuels. You can get a tiny pellet of uranium, enriched uranium, and you can generate more energy than like many kilograms of coal.
So wouldn't it be wiser just to essentially like divert the rest of our like all the gas, oils, and others? Wouldn't it just be wiser, like, eventually to just transition them into nuclear, and that way it could be sustainable and at the same time clean?
Imagine if a nuclear car blew up.
Well, no, not a nuclear
We're not
car.
talking about
Something like
nuclear
plant.
cars. Yeah,
No, but like that's the thing, is that the reason why they don't make nuclear cars is that if they blow up,
Well,
No, I mean,
that's
I
not
don't
really
mean cars. I mean, like,
feasible
plants,
idea,
like,
because also we're going to dispose of the waste. So there are many problems with nuclear plants. If you look at the good side, sure, that sounds really good. Problem, to build a nuclear plant costs billions of dollars. It also costs billions of dollars to maintain that nuclear plant. And also, we need to make sure that no accidents occur, and that is a huge risk, as always. And lastly, nuclear plants, they have radioactive waste. Okay, they are only clean as in they don't emit emissions, but it doesn't mean they're safe and clean in other regards. The nuclear radiation produced from the waste has to be buried deep underground, like under like many feet of concrete. And we hope and pray that there's no cracks and that doesn't leak. And that will be there for hundreds of thousands of years. The radiation is not going to go away anytime soon. All right, so that is the problem. So right now in Pickering, they have a nuclear plant. We bury our barrels underground, okay, and hope that there's no leak. So yeah, there's definitely problems with nuclear plant. It's not like, hey, let's just build nuclear plants everywhere. Many places don't even have that technology. Okay, some countries like Iran, they're fighting to build nuclear plants. The US doesn't believe them. They think they're building nukes, but Iran's like, no, we're building nuclear plants. So it depends on the country even. Like, UN gets to decide who can build the nuclear plants and who doesn't. Japan can build nuclear plants, no problem. Korea can build nuclear plants, no problem. Germany can build nuclear plants. Iran, no, you're not doing it because we don't trust you. That's how the world and politics work. You see what I mean? Any other comments?
This is kind of a stupid suggestion, and it's probably very unfeasible. But you know how we have like the space station, right? What if we just,
Move to space?
shipped all of our, what if we just took all of the nuclear waste and just ejected it into space or store it on some
It's going to be in orbit.
Well, yes, but let's see. The space
You know
station is in
cost
orbit,
of
right?
doing that?
Huh?
You know the cost of launching a rocket to send those into space, and you got to do it.
Yeah, that's what I meant. It's very unfeasible. But like, let's say this is possible. Would it be possible to bring it to like a station, and then from the station just fire it out of orbit, and then be gone with it?
Yeah, that is definitely not a good idea. You're losing resources. Like you're wasting billions and billions of dollars and fuel just to get rid of waste. No, I don't. We can find better ideas than that. Okay, so this brings us to sustainability. So I kind of talked about renewable energy and electric vehicles. So we definitely need to transition the economy to be based on these things. Okay, right now we don't have that. We're trying. Elon Musk would very much like that. So also, we shouldn't emphasize on how much resources we can extract. It's not about, hey, there's still oil in the ground, let's get it. That's like Donald Trump literally said, there are many cubic kilometers of methane, natural gas, under the US soil. Okay, we can get it via fracking, so let's get it. Well, yeah, you have it doesn't mean you should extract it. Okay, can you do it sustainably and cleanly? That's the issue. Okay, and we also need to help provinces like Alberta make the transition from fossil fuel dominated industries to more cleaner alternatives. And these are easier said than done. So what are the renewable energies? Solar, a lot of you mentioned solar already. Solar panels capture energy from the sun, and then they convert that into electric currents. This is woefully inefficient. Okay, there are many problems with all of these. And then there's wind. I'm sure you've seen some of these before. There's hydro. We already have that. Hydro is actually pretty good. Like hydro is quite reliable. The problem is you need a river to build a dam on. Without a river, you're not building a hydropower plant. So this is restricted to geography. Geothermal is also very good. This is using the earth heat under the ground to heat up water to generate electricity. So the problem with that is you need a geyser for this. You need like a vent that connects to the inside of the earth, and those are rare. So you can't.
Your mic is really weird now.
Sorry?
Your microphone sounds really weird all of a sudden.
All weird.
Really?
Yeah.
What does it sound like?
Like
So
a
the quality just
crazy echo or something? I don't know.
Yeah. The quality is a lot worse.
Nothing's changed on my part. So, okay, maybe all of you turn off your mics and that should be better, and let me know if this persists. Because I didn't really change anything at all.
It might have to do with internet connection.
Yeah, could be. All right, so can you hear me clearly though?
Kind of.
Yeah.
It's kind of
it's
really
fine.
quiet now.
Quiet? Okay, I'll speak up.
Quiet.
As long as you can hear me, I don't know what I can do to fix that because I don't see anything wrong.
We can hear you. It's fine.
I
It's
mean, I
just
can
not
I
that
can
good.
hear you pretty well. But,
Okay, so just try your best to hear me well. All right, so the next one is biomass. We can burn wood or feces for energy. That's renewable because you can get more of those easily. The issue with that is that's not very efficient. You have to clear forests to get firewood. You have to get manure from animals to burn, and that's quite slow. That doesn't produce a lot of energy. And lastly is tidal. Tidal energy is using ocean currents. It builds turbines under the water, and the current should spin them to generate electricity. Again, this is geography dependent. You need to have tides and you need to have currents at certain speeds. Otherwise, it's not going to work. And only few places on Earth have that luxury. So a lot of these have geographic restrictions. A lot of these are just inefficient. So, and a lot of them doesn't occur all the time, like the sun. If it's not sunny, if it's at night, you're not harnessing energy. And the wind, it doesn't, there's no wind a lot of times. So that's enough about renewables. So just know that there are many problems with those renewables. So we need to develop better technology, better ways to utilize those energies. Question?
Actually, I have a question. For the hydro energy, where you get essentially a river and then you make a dam and then you get hydroelectricity, isn't the goal to prevent further destruction to the environment, but doesn't the dam kind of destroy the environment surrounding?
Yes, dams do disrupt the local ecosystem, which is unfortunate. But we rather have that than global climate change. You see what I'm saying? Well, hydro is not a solution. It is something we use in Canada because of its low emissions and because we have rivers, so we can actually do it cheaply. But yeah, we're not going to have that everywhere. So we're not going to destroy ecosystems around the world. If that means we have to destroy it a little bit, I think that's a sacrifice that we are willing to make the animals make. You see what I mean? All right, so I'm sure you've seen this sticker before. If you haven't seen this, just go to your kitchen, look at your oven. You probably have that. It's the Guide symbol. This tells you how energy efficient that device is compared to others of the same type. Okay, let's say that this is an oven. How do you read this? Well, if you look at that little triangle, there's a number, okay, 554 kilowatt hour. That tells you how much energy this, energy this uses per year. But that number is, it doesn't matter. Look at the little triangle under that number. There's a scale. To the left side, that means you're really energy saving. On the right side, you use a lot of energy. Okay, so the closer you are, that triangle, to the left, the more energy efficient this device is compared to its competitors. So you want to see where the triangle is, because if, let's say you get an oven, you're not going to get an oven that uses very little energy. All of the ovens will use a lot of energy. It's just that within those ovens, how much energy you use between each other. Okay, does that make sense? So that absolute number doesn't matter. Okay, if you look at the oven, it's going to use more energy than your microwave. So your microwave is going to have a smaller number. But it doesn't mean your microwave is better than your oven when it comes to energy efficiency. So compare. There are two appliances here. Which one saves more energy, left or right?
Right. I mean, wait, which one is closer to the white part? I don't know. I don't see. Is the right one closer to the white?
The
Okay,
right
so
one.
The left
It
one
is.
is better.
the left
The right one looks better.
Hold on.
That's a tough one, isn't it?
It's the right one.
It looks like the right one.
Seriously? Wow, it's like people see patterns where there isn't any. They're the same. I don't know how you're making that distinction.
Well, okay, I think there's this thing, because like, you know where the panel is where we see all the faces, so it kind of cuts off, so it looks different.
Oh,
You can
okay.
hide that.
Yeah, so it looks like the one on the right it's like closer to the left than the one on the left.
Okay,
You know
so
what I
yeah,
mean?
my point is look at where that arrow is pointing, not the number itself. The 630 and the 266 doesn't matter. They're different devices. You can't compare them like that. You see what I mean? Like it's like comparing a fridge to a microwave. They use different energies because they're different devices. You want to compare to a fridge to a fridge. So that little arrow where they are tells you how energy efficient. They're at about the same place, so they're equally efficient. You see what I'm saying? So they're about the same. That's how you read an inner guide. So if you're curious after the class, just go to your kitchen, find these stickers and see where that arrow is. Energy Star is another sticker that you get. If your appliance is energy saving, you will have the sticker. My laptop has the sticker. I don't know if yours does, so you can also look around. This is international. Many appliances should have an Energy Star if it is efficient. Okay, so when you go and buy appliances, take this into account, how efficient that appliance is. That could save you money in the long run. These devices might be more expensive up front, but if you're going to use it for years, it is a good investment to make over the long course of time. It will save you a lot on electricity bills, and it is more efficient. So it uses less energy, which saves the environment. All right, so we talked about Canadian contributions and plans for climate change. I have to say that it is quite disappointing. Canada is on par to miss our target. So tomorrow we'll look at what individuals can do as yourselves. What can you do to help? A lot of contributions to the greenhouse effect comes from individual people. All right, households, what we do at home, what we eat, where we go. Those are all important factors. So that's tomorrow's class. So we looked at the global level, we looked at national level. Tomorrow will be individual actions on climate change. Okay, so any questions before we end this? All right then, I'm gonna call it. Have a great day.